Girl, you drinking a lot more than usual.
And I really had to take a step back to myself and be like, is everything okay? Like, hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Kyla, and today I'm back with another video that's going to be really helpful for you guys. And this video is going to be talking about peace. You're going to learn how to understand the difference between God's peace and false peace, and how to detect if you're lacking peace in your life. I'm going to be talking about the spiritual, mental, and emotional and physical ways that you can identify a lack of peace in your life. And then I'm going to show you how to regain that peace. And of course, I'm going to give some personal examples from my own life, so you can have some real life application on what a lack of peace actually feels and looks like. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button below. If you're returning, welcome back to the family. I'm super excited to have you. As usual, y'all know I don't like talking to myself, so thank y'all for showing up consistently. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's video. What I'm about to talk about doesn't only apply to people who are struggling with homosexuality or people who have same-sex attractions. This applies to anyone who is trying to identify why they have certain voids in their life that just can't seem to be filled. So just keep that in mind even as I tell my story. Throughout my journey of trying to find Christ, and even before I even was serious about developing a relationship with Christ, I would just kind of notice certain things that I did and certain things that were happening to me that just weren't normal. Like, while I was in my relationship, I had a lot of anxiety, right? I was a creative, and so creating things was normal for me, but it seemed like anytime I was close to doing something that I knew that I wanted to do, I would get a lot of anxiety around it, and anxiety to the point where it was crippling. I just could not move forward, and this would constantly happen to me. And I would be asking myself, why am I so anxious? Why am I so paralyzed? Why am I so crippled, right? So that was one thing, is noticing that I had a lot more anxiety. And then I also noticed that throughout that relationship, I had a lot of mood swings. I would be really, really happy one day and really, really sad or really angry and really frustrated, just a whole mix of emotions. And I was just at some point I was thinking to myself, that's not really normal to be having these bursts of anger one moment and then being really calm the next. It was really I was really unstable in my emotions. And the way I combated that was with drinking. I was drinking very heavily. This is also something where I realized, you know what, something's not right. I'm drinking much more than I usually drink. I used to just have a glass of wine or something like that when I started drinking, but then that glass kind of transitioned to a bottle of wine. Then that bottle turned into a gallon of wine. I was just
Girl, you drinking a lot more than usual.
and I really had to take a step back to myself and be like, is everything okay? So that was one thing. And then I just started having some sleepless nights. Some nights I would just be up for no reason. I could not go to sleep. Some nights I would be bursting out in tears. It was a lot of weird stuff that just was not normal, and I couldn't really figure out the root. And so growing up in church, like I said, that was my foundation. And I tried meditating, I tried finding my inner peace, I tried doing yoga, I tried doing all of these things, and it was just those things would only give me a temporary fill. They wouldn't sustain me. It's after a while I was oh, I came out of meditation, oh, I feel good. But as soon as somebody did something to me, I was ready to pop off. Lack of peace is something that manifests itself in different ways, and if we're not even aware of how it manifests, then we can't look at ourselves and realize that we're actually the thing that we're trying to figure out what's wrong is really a lack of peace. So let me just start off by breathing first, because sometimes I don't breathe when I talk. Let me just start off by telling you what is false peace, right? So false peace is temporary. It's dependent upon your circumstances and your situations and your emotions. It is actually a false feeling of relief. And it usually happens when you try to quickly escape a situation that makes you uncomfortable, or when you're trying to convince yourself that something that you're doing is okay. This is when you have that false peace. It can often come from being excited about something. You convince yourself that because you are excited, it must be peace. It must be the right direction. It must be exactly where you're supposed to go. Okay, so now that you know what false peace is and how it feels, let's talk about what is God's peace. Now in the Bible, it talks about how God gives us peace not as the world gives it to us, right? And so God's peace literally surpasses all understanding. It is not dependent upon our emotions or our circumstances. It doesn't matter whether we are up or down, like we still have access to God's peace no matter what. We don't have to try to really hard to be positive all the time in order to access it. We don't have to be on good vibes or good vibrations or anything like that to access it. God's peace is available at all times. And while false peace was temporary, God's peace is eternal. God's peace is perfect and it's constant. We always have access to it, but the only way we can get it is through relationship with God. The world will have you believing that you can have peace in every other way, but the world's peace is always temporary. Sometimes we can even when I was drinking, like I drank myself to a situation that I was just like, you know what? It's all fine. It's going to be better. But then when I woke up the next morning, that peace faded. That's how you know the difference between God's true peace and false peace. I'm going to emphasize this because this is really important. God's peace only comes from true relationship with Him. If you are not connected to the Father, there is no way that you can have access to His peace. You can't live in the world but want God's peace. You can't be walking in disobedience constantly and want to have peace. This is why we experience like the anxiousness, the empty feelings that nothing can really fill us. This is why some of us try to cope with it by having sex. Like there's no relationship, there's no person that could give you this inner peace that you're looking for. It doesn't come from crystals, it doesn't come from any of the kind of that stuff. It literally, true peace only comes from being in relationship with God. God's peace makes you feel complete. It makes you feel whole. It makes you feel protected, comforted. Even if situations don't even look like they're going in your favor, like when you have access to God's peace, you are literally at rest. Like, your spirit has relief. Like there is literal relief in your spirit. Oftentimes we can tell the difference between false peace and God's peace because false peace, like our spirit is never at rest. Our flesh might be at rest. We may be able to rationalize and convince ourselves that we are at peace with our situation, but our spirit will never be at rest. And this is what I talked about in my testimony when I was like living my life as usual in this relationship, but I kept having those tugs. Those tugs were coming from my spirit and it was causing my spirit to not be at rest. There was no relief in my spirit, which is why year after year I kept having those same tugs because I thought that I could like manifest peace without God, but that was not the case. And I realized that later on, and that's when I decided to actually commit to building a relationship with God, getting to know His character, spending time with Him, studying the Word. And that's when I realized that, okay, you know what, the way that I was trying to handle my problems, the way that I was trying to live my life on my own and take things into my own hands instead of just trusting God, who is my creator, who has a perfect plan for my life, who knows how things are going to work out anyway, who wants to help me and wants to guide me and wants to comfort me. I was trying to do things in my own way and it was just not working out for me. And I just got to a point where I was just like, okay, God, like I don't know much about you besides what I've been taught in church, but I do know that this feeling, these tugs, this emptiness is not something that I can feel on my own or with a person. It doesn't matter, like, you know, what other things I had going on in my life, what was making me happy. Like, I am not sustained and I need you to show me what's going on. I need you to show me the root. Proverbs 14:12 actually tells us that there is a way that seems right to man, but in the end it only leads to death. A lot of times, like I said, everything in the world will try to make you feel like you really can gain peace of mind through all of these things like crystals, good energy, good vibes, relationships, like all of these other things, like, but none of that works. Like all of that stuff only leads you further away from God. And so this is why I really want to push and let you understand that like false peace is temporary. Eventually that peace will fade because it doesn't come from God, it comes from the world. God's true peace is eternal. It is eternal. It will always be there. It will trump every single negative situation that's going on in your life that you can't figure out. It doesn't matter whether you were up or you were down. God's peace is what's going to sustain you. Okay, so now that I've actually defined the difference between God's peace and false peace, I want to show you some of the manifested signs of a lack of peace. These are some of the symptoms that we experience that we sometimes can't automatically draw back to a lack of peace, which is why I really want to spend some time identifying these. So you can better follow along. I'm going to divide these into spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical symptoms. So let's start with the spiritual consequences of a lack of peace. So when we have a lack of peace, spiritually, we leave ourselves open for attacks from the enemy. We become carnally minded instead of spiritually minded. Carnally means you're thinking with your flesh, you're thinking with your own will instead of thinking with God's will. And we already know that whenever we try to operate in our own will, it really doesn't lead anywhere. We just ultimately be ending up in the same cycles over and over, year after year. You have a tendency to make poor choices often. This is something that I noticed in myself. It would be like I knew what to do, like I knew what I was supposed to be doing, but like for some reason I just kept choosing the wrong thing. Also, what happens is that there is a decrease in your study and prayer time. The less time you spend in the Word, the less time you spend in God's presence, the more open you are. And you need, in order to sustain a relationship with God, you have to constantly seek His will, constantly be in His presence. Okay, so that was the spiritual consequences of a lack of peace. Now let's move on to the emotional consequences. So some of the emotional consequences are mild or severe emotional breakdowns. Anxiety. Literally, anxiety is the number one sign of a lack of peace in your life. Different ways that anxiety can manifest itself is in like sudden bursts of anger, short temper. I would have like panic attacks, like random panic attacks for stuff that I knew that I could do, but like literally like I just would be paralyzed in my own thoughts sometimes. Eating disorders. You'll start eating too much or eating too little. Like your appetite can be affected. I know that when I was going through a lot of stressful situations, I was eating everything under the sun, okay? Or some days I would be so stressed out that I wouldn't be eating anything. You have a lot of instability in your life. You go from rational to irrational at the snap of a finger. You have prolonged sorrow, depression, unhealthy relationships. Some people can actually become addicted to toxic relationships. They know that they're toxic, but for some reason they just keep finding themselves drawn to toxic situations. These are all emotional signs of a lack of peace in your life. Let's move on to the mental. For the mental consequences, you may have tormenting thoughts or dreams. You can become absent-minded. Your mind will be so consumed with one thing that like you may start to forget stuff, and you may start to just become maybe like delusional and oblivious as to what's going on around you because your mind is so consumed on one thing and you just can't focus. You can't focus. This is often like where mental illness comes in. Like all of a sudden, maybe you didn't have anxiety before, maybe you didn't have depression, maybe you didn't have suicidal thoughts before, but all of a sudden, because you have no peace, like your emotions are just having free reign. This looks different for everybody, but I'm just giving a few examples. So now we can move into the physical consequences of a lack of peace. And so physical, I experienced some of these as well. Physical consequences can include having sleepless nights, being awakened randomly in the middle of the night and not knowing why, being really consumed and worried through these sleepless nights. You can become easily irritated. That was a big one for me. I was always irritated about something. Like my ex would often be like, "You're always mad." I'd be like, "I'm not even trying to be mad, but I just found myself always mad." And because of that, there were a lot of arguments. There was a lot of strife in our relationship. Even though we had a good relationship, like there would be lots of periods where we would just be arguing for no reason, and I just like could not figure out why. But there was a lack of peace. And then again, like immorality, now we are trying to figure out how to fill these voids. So some of us take our bodies and fill it with things. This is why you have people that are sleeping with multiple people and they can't figure out, they're never like satisfied, they're never fulfilled. Then you have an increased dependence on alcohol or drugs. Like for me, I know that when I woke up, I was having a drink. When I had lunch, I was having a drink. When I had dinner, I was having a drink. Like it seemed like all of a sudden I had to be drinking all of the time. And like, you know, I feel like there's nothing wrong with like a glass of wine here and there or something like that, but I feel like when you get to the point where you are you have to have a drink. Like you can't have a conversation without a drink. You can't go nowhere without a drink. Like you having a drink when you wake up. Like that constant dependence on a substance to sustain you is when things become like, okay, you know what, maybe I should take a step back and actually figure out what's going on in my life. So again, those were all manifested consequences of what happens when you have a lack of peace in your life. So now we have taken the time, we talked about what is false peace, what is God's peace. I talked to you about the mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical consequences of having a lack of peace in your life. And now I'm going to actually show you how to find that peace of mind or regain it. So the first step is to understand the root cause. In order to do that, you need to seek the source, okay? You need the source to reveal the source of the issues in your life. If you don't identify the actual source and the root cause of where the lack of peace is coming from in your life, then you will constantly find yourself putting on quick fixes and temporary solutions to something, and the problem will still remain. It will always bubble up and bubble over. So in order to do that, you need to seek God. Seek God in relationship, in prayer, in worship, in study time. That is how He is going to reveal to you what is causing that lack of peace. The second thing you're going to do is when he reveals the root to you, you have to be obedient to the strategy that he is going to give to you to cut that root off and to fill that void with him. Often there's a void that we are trying to fill, which is a source of lack of peace. And because we have gone to the wrong source to fill that void, we never get the solution. So once God's, like for me, the source of my lack of peace was disobedience for the fact that God told me to leave this lifestyle and leave this relationship. And because I was trying to be obedient in every other area of my life, the lack of peace still remained because I was not being obedient to the one thing he told me that I did not want to let go of, which was actually the root cause of why I had a lack of peace. Well, one of the root causes of why I had a lack of peace in my life. So once God reveals that root to you, be obedient and go ahead and remove that root. Yes, it's going to be painful, but this is going to stop you from being in those cycles year after year. And God will give you the strategy. He will give you the words. He will give you the strength. He will give you the peace that comes with knowing that you're in alignment with him. And it's all going to work out, even though, like I said, it's going to be really scary, and you're going to have some tears, you're going to have some heartbreak, but ultimately God is going to provide you that peace, which is going to sustain you in knowing that you made the right decision. Even when, you have some people that rise up that may not agree with the decision that you have made, God is going to give you peace. Peace of mind. He's going to relieve your spirit from the stress and the anxiety that usually would come with having to make such a difficult decision. So the third thing that you're going to have to do is to continuously seek God's will and seek his presence. That is what is going to help you sustain your peace. When you are disconnected from the source, you do not have access to peace. Think about a lamp. If a lamp is not plugged in, it's not going to work. Okay, you have to be plugged into God at all times, because if you're not, like we said before, one of the signs is that you open yourself up from attacks from the enemy. You can't just go to God to get a quick fix and think everything's going to be all right when you start to fall off. It's not. Seeking God is a continuous process, and he's graceful. He gives us grace to just keep on going and keep on going after him. So the way that you do that is through prayer, worship, and studying. You pray, talk to God. Don't make praying overcomplicated. Just have conversations with God. That's how it starts. You worship, put on your worship music, invite the presence of God in, create an atmosphere for him to dwell in. And then study, like the word, the word coming out of your mouth has power. It is what is going to sustain you when the enemy comes in and tries to bring those thoughts, the thoughts of depression, anxiety, fear. That's what's going to sustain you. Study scriptures on peace. Study scriptures that combat any of the ways that the enemy will try to come towards you. You have to know God's word. God and his word are one, and that is how he's going to communicate with you most often. Okay, everyone, I hope that was really helpful for you all. Again, watch this video as many times as you need, because I know that was a lot of information, but I hope that you take some time to really ask yourself, are you really experiencing God's peace, or are you experiencing false peace that is manifested as a survival tactic to try to keep us comfortable where we are instead of really addressing the root issues? Like, are you just covering up the problem, or are you experiencing God's true peace, which comes from being in alignment and being in his will? So that is all I have for you guys. I hope that was extremely helpful. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I will see you on the next video.